I will never forget the sound the envelope made when I finally opened it. Thin, papery, almost innocent. I had found it wedged behind a stack of unused placemats in my late brother's sideboard, the place where he kept things he wanted safe but accessible. A place my Aunt Lorraine had rummaged through quite freely during the chaotic week after his funeral. A place she insisted held nothing important anymore. Yet there it was. A sealed letter. My brother's handwriting on the front. And inside, a certified notification from Evergreen Mutual Insurance acknowledging a $420,000 life insurance policy, naming me as the sole beneficiary. I read that number 3 times, thinking surely there must be a mistake. I wasn't the person who needed money. My brother knew that. And he also knew our family's fractures. He knew who might exploit them. Still, he had entrusted this to me. Quietly. Clearly. And somehow, it had been hidden. My hands shook. Not because of the money, but because of the lie. Because for 6 weeks after his passing, my aunt had insisted no policy existed. She'd spoken confidently, almost condescendingly, whenever I asked. I looked everywhere, she'd said. There's nothing. Your brother had nothing left. But this letter had a date stamp from the week before he died. And the envelope's corner bore a faint smear of Lorraine's plum-colored lotion. The same one she used every day. I sat there, breath shallow, feeling the kitchen grow smaller. Something inside me, the part of me that had tried all my life to keep this family gentle, reasonable, forgiving, quietly broke. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply whispered aloud. She really did it. She had stolen my brother's final act of generosity. She had buried the truth beneath her own sense of entitlement. And for the first time in my 63 years, I realized I was fully capable of choosing a different path. A path of clarity, of documentation, of unwavering consequence. But I would not confront her immediately. No. I would wait. I would watch her brag at dinner. I would watch her dismiss me, the way she always had. And when the executor arrived, invited by me, quietly, she would face the truth she thought she had smothered. I pressed the envelope flat against the table. The letter felt heavier than paper. Heavier than ink. Heavier than her lies. Yet even then, on that quiet Thursday afternoon, I knew this wasn't merely about the money. It was about my brother's voice, silenced by illness, but resurrected through legal print. And I intended for everyone to hear it. I set the envelope down with purpose. And right then, just before I reached for my phone to make the first of several very careful calls, I heard the crunch of tires in my driveway. Lorraine's car. Early. Unannounced. Again. Her footsteps approached my front door. I folded the letter shut. She knocked once, sharp, entitled, and let herself in. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. She knew exactly what I had found. And she was here to get it back. My name is Margaret Ellery, though most people call me Maggie. I am 63 years old, a retired librarian, a widow of 7 calm years, and, until recently, a woman who believed in giving the benefit of the doubt far more often than it was deserved. I live alone now in the old cedar-sided house where my brother Daniel and I once chased each other barefoot across the kitchen tiles. The place is filled with echoes of our childhood, the whir of the ceiling fan that never stops humming, the scent of old paper from my personal library, and the lingering warmth of a life that always felt anchored by Daniel's gentle steadiness. When he died, far too early at 58, I thought the worst part would be missing his voice. I was wrong. The worst part was discovering what people will do when grief clouds judgment and money sharpens greed. Lorraine, my father's sister, had always been a complicated figure. A widow herself, but not a soft one. She carried her loneliness like a badge, insisting the family owed her compensation in the form of unwavering obedience. She was a woman skilled in taking space, authority, and, as it turned out, mail. When she entered my house that day, her eyes swept the room the way a crow surveys a field, calculating what it might collect. "You weren't answering your phone," she said. "I was busy," I replied. "Doing what?" Her tone was already laced with suspicion. She always spoke to me as though I were a child sneaking cookies before dinner. Going through Daniel's old things again? I told you there's nothing left. I kept my expression neutral. A lifetime of enduring her barbed remarks had made me an expert in appearing placid when I was anything but. I wasn't going through anything, I said simply. Just organizing. Her eyes flicked toward the dining room. Far too quickly. Almost as if she expected to see something there. Something she'd hidden. Something she feared I'd uncovered. I felt the weight of the policy letter tucked beneath my planner on the counter. Its edges seemed to pulse against the wood. She stepped closer. You should leave the estate matters to me. You know grief makes you scattered. My pulse quickened, not from fear, but from an awakening sense of resolve. I'm perfectly capable, I said. Her lips tightened. Lorraine hated calm resistance. She thrived on emotional dominance, and I was no longer providing it. I offered her tea. Something in my tone made her decline. She left soon after, too soon, almost abruptly, and as her car pulled away, I exhaled slowly. It was the first breath of a new version of myself. A version who would no longer let Lorraine rewrite our family's truths. That evening, I reviewed the estate documents Daniel had entrusted to me months before he died. Quietly, without fanfare, he had given me access codes, account summaries, and a short handwritten note. Maggie, if there's confusion, don't let them push you aside. I traced his writing with my thumb. And I made a decision. I would follow the truth wherever it led. I would involve the executor. I would not warn Lorraine. But the next morning, when I began my careful search of Daniel's belongings for further clues, I discovered something else. Another paper. Another omission. And this one was far worse. Because it proved she hadn't merely hidden a letter. She had tampered with his will. My family has always been a study in contrasts. My brother and I, close and steady. Lorraine, dramatic and imposing. And scattered around the edges were cousins, step-relatives, and a handful of distant family friends who orbited Lorraine the way moths orbit a porch light, drawn by warmth but often burned by proximity. For most of my life, I tried to keep peace by staying small. Not silent, but soft. Not confrontational, but accommodating. Daniel used to tease me kindly. Mags, you're the only person I know who apologizes to furniture after bumping into it. So yes, conflict was never my natural terrain. But grief rearranges a person's foundations, and betrayal shakes what's left. The morning after Lorraine's unexpected visit, I drove to Daniel's house to continue sorting through the final boxes. His home had always smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. Even now, that warmth lingered under the inevitable dust of absence. While opening a box labeled "Personal," I discovered a manila folder wrapped in one of his old flannel shirts. The care with which he had wrapped it struck me immediately. Daniel was deliberate. Intentional. A man who hid nothing without reason. Inside the folder was a photocopy of his will, one I recognized, but clipped behind it was something I had never seen, an earlier draft. And on that earlier draft, in his own handwriting, was a note. Lorraine asked for this version. Said it was more fair. Do not use. A chill moved through me. I sat back on my heels, staring at the words. Lorraine had always been involved in everyone's business, but this was manipulation. Asking a dying man to consider changes she believed would benefit her? That alone was unethical. But then I noticed something else. The signature line on the earlier draft bore a faint indentation, as though someone had traced over it lightly, or pressed on the paper with a pen while forging it onto a different sheet. My heart pounded. This wasn't mere interference. This was preparation. It dawned on me then, Lorraine may have intended to present this draft as the valid will after Daniel died. A will that diverted certain assets to her. A will that might have held up in confusion if not for the executor. But something had stopped her. Maybe Daniel refused to sign it. Maybe she panicked. Maybe she assumed she'd find enough elsewhere, like the insurance letter, to compensate for the loss. The pieces were forming a pattern. Ugly. Calculated. Cruel. I called the executor Mr. Latham, a calm, meticulous man Daniel had trusted. "I need to meet with you," I said. "As soon as possible." He agreed to stop by my house 2 days later, during the family dinner Lorraine herself had arranged as a healing gathering. Healing. She had no idea what was coming. But family dinner meant more than confrontation. It meant facing my cousins, the ones who had always seen me as the quiet one, the one who would never understand the business side of things. Their assumptions had been shaped by years of Lorraine's influence. I spent the next 2 days gathering documents, organizing them chronologically, noting every inconsistency. And what struck me most was not the money itself. It was the betrayal of trust. Daniel's trust. My trust. The family's trust in truth. By the time the dinner night arrived, I felt strangely steady. Almost like the librarian I once was, presenting information with clarity, context, and quiet authority. But as I set the table, I received a text from one of my cousins. "Heads up. Lorraine says you've been acting unstable. We're worried." I stared at the message. Unstable. Of course. That was always her strategy. Discredit the person who's holding the truth. But little did she know, the truth was about to walk through my front door. Because Mr. Latham, the executor, had just texted me. On my way. Bring the documents to the table. And that dinner, meant to restore her control, was about to dismantle it entirely. The dinner began with forced politeness, the kind that clings to the air like humidity. Lorraine arrived fashionably late, sweeping in with a soft shawl and a loud greeting designed to command attention. "Maggie, dear, I hope you made something comforting. We've all been so drained lately." Aunt Lorraine's voice carried the false sweetness of someone who already believed she'd won. My cousins followed behind her, offering hesitant smiles. They were good people, but easily swayed, especially by the relative who never hesitated to speak first and loudest. I served the roast chicken and vegetables quietly, listening as Lorraine dominated the conversation. She reminisced about Daniel with selective memory. She spoke of estate matters as though she alone understood them. And then, with casual cruelty, she said, "Of course, poor Maggie is still convinced there's more paperwork out there. Grief does that. Makes you see things that aren't real." I didn't react. I was waiting for the doorbell. But before it rang, before truth entered the room in the form of a calm executor holding a briefcase, something else occurred, something that revealed the depth of Lorraine's interference. My cousin Elise leaned over to me and whispered, "Aunt Lorraine told us you tried to claim Daniel left you everything. We thought that didn't sound like you." I closed my eyes briefly. Not content with hiding documents. Not content with manipulating wills. She had begun rewriting the narrative entirely. I placed my napkin on the table and looked at Elise calmly. "I never made such a claim." Before Elise could respond, Aunt Lorraine clinked her glass for attention. "I think," she announced, "it's time we discuss reality. Maggie has been." The doorbell rang. Lorraine froze mid-sentence. Her eyes flicked toward the foyer. I stood. "I've invited someone," I said softly. Lorraine's forehead tightened. "Who?" "The executor." A silence fell so sharply it felt like the room itself took a breath. Then I added, "He will help clarify the matters you've been explaining incorrectly." Lorraine's face lost a shade of color. I walked toward the door, my steps measured and certain. Behind me, I heard my cousins whispering, confused, unsettled, suddenly aware that something significant was unfolding. I opened the door. There stood Mr. Henry Latham, dressed in his usual navy suit, carrying a leather portfolio. "Good evening, Ms. Ellery," he said. "I understand there are discrepancies to review." I stepped aside to let him in. Lorraine remained seated, stiff, her jaw clenched tight. Mr. Latham offered polite greetings before taking a seat at the table. Then he opened his briefcase and placed a collection of documents neatly before him. I received materials from Maggie, he explained, including a letter that should have been in Daniel's estate file. Lorraine swallowed hard. I watched her hands tense. Mr. Latham continued. Evergreen Mutual Insurance confirmed a $420,000 policy naming Maggie as the sole beneficiary. They also confirmed the notification letter was mailed to Daniel's residence 3 days before his passing. He paused. And that someone signed for it. A tremor moved across the table, invisible but felt. Lorraine's voice cracked slightly as she said, "Well, anyone could have signed." But Mr. Latham pulled out a printed page and slid it toward her. Evergreen provided a scan of the digital signature. Everyone leaned closer. It was unmistakable. Aunt Lorraine's full name. Gasps spread around the table. My cousins stared at her, stunned. Lorraine's lips parted but no words emerged. And then Mr. Latham said the words that altered the entire night. There is also concern that an earlier draft of Daniel's will, one marked explicitly "Do not use," was found among his belongings, showing signs of tampering. Lorraine's breath hitched. The truth was laid bare. And yet, we were only at the beginning. Because consequences require more than exposure. They require documentation. They require process. They require patience. And I had all three. The room felt colder after Mr. Latham's revelations, not from temperature, but from truth stripping away the comfortable illusions Lorraine had wrapped herself in. My cousins sat in stunned silence. Lorraine's posture compressed inward, as if trying to make herself smaller than her guilt. Mr. Latham cleared his throat gently. There are steps we must take to determine the extent of the interference. I nodded, sliding my own folder onto the table. Inside were the items I'd spent hours assembling. At the insurance letter she hid her a time-stamped video from my door camera showing her leaving Daniel's house with documents 2 days after his death, a photo of the lotion smear on the envelope corner, the 2 versions of the will, the legitimate one and the altered draft, Daniel's handwritten notes contradicting the changes Lorraine had proposed, statements from 2 neighbors who had seen her going through Daniel's mail, a transcript of her own texts claiming there was no insurance policy at all. Each piece by itself painted a shadow. Together, they formed a mural. I spoke quietly, my voice steady but firm, each sentence shaped for TTS clarity, each pause intentional. I did not want to believe my aunt would hide something as significant as Daniel's last provision. But the evidence shows she not only concealed a $420,000 policy, she attempted to manipulate his will and control access to his mail. My cousins exchanged horrified glances. They were seeing a woman they had trusted all their lives suddenly cast in stark, undeniable light. Lorraine tried to compose herself. Her voice came out brittle. "You're twisting everything. I was trying to help. You were overwhelmed." Mr. Latham's gaze remained neutral. "A signature cannot be explained as concern, Lorraine." She looked at me then, truly looked at me, as if seeing me not as the quiet niece but as an adversary, one who no longer feared her storms. "You won't ruin this family," she hissed softly. I shook my head. "I'm not ruining anything. I'm revealing what already happened." Mr. Latham outlined the investigation process, his tone methodical. "We will file a report with probate court. The forged will draft will be examined by a handwriting specialist. The insurance claim will proceed under the legal beneficiary, Maggie, and the court will determine whether your actions constitute interference with estate administration." Lorraine's jaw tightened. "And," he continued, "depending on findings, there could be civil consequences." The word hung there. Consequences. Not revenge. Not punishment. Just the inevitable result of choices she made while believing no one would question her. She rose abruptly, knocking her chair back. "This is an ambush," she rasped. "You're all turning on me." But no one spoke in her defense. Not this time. She stormed toward the door, but before exiting, she spun back toward me. What do you hope to gain from this, Maggie? Money you don't even need. I held her gaze with calm sincerity. I want the truth to stand where you tried to bury it. She stared at me, searching for weakness. She found none. Then she left, slamming the door so hard the dishes trembled. The room remained silent for several long moments. My cousins finally exhaled, some covering their mouths, others whispering apologies for having doubted me. But I wasn't angry with them. I once believed Lorraine too. As the last of the family left and Mr. Latham packed his briefcase, he looked at me and said, "You handled this with remarkable composure. The next steps will be formal, but they will be in your favor." I thanked him quietly. But as I closed the door behind him, my legs trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what was coming. Because Lorraine was not the kind of woman who accepted exposure. She was the kind who retaliated. And I soon discovered she had one more card she intended to play. One that could have undone everything, if I hadn't been ready. 2 days after the confrontation, I received an unexpected voicemail. It was short, sharp, delivered with controlled fury. "Maggie, it's Lorraine. You've made a mistake. A serious one. I need to speak with you before this gets uglier." I saved the voicemail immediately. Documentation. Over the next week, I heard from neighbors that she had been visiting Daniel's house again. Snooping. Asking questions. Trying to gather information she could twist into her own defense. I reported this, calmly, to the Executor. Again. Documentation. What she didn't know was that Mr. Latham had already requested the court to issue a temporary administrative hold on all estate materials until the investigation concluded. Lorraine's actions were not just inappropriate, they were illegal. Still, she persisted. One afternoon, as I returned from the grocery store, I found her waiting in my driveway. Hands on hips. Eyes blazing. "We need to talk," she demanded. I locked my car silently and walked toward my front steps. She followed, her voice rising. "You think you're protecting Daniel's memory? You're dragging it through the mud. He would never have wanted lawyers involved. He trusted me." I stopped then, halfway up the steps, and turned to face her. "Daniel trusted truth," I said. "He trusted process. He trusted that his final wishes would not be altered." She scoffed. "You've always been naive." "No," I replied. "I've always been patient." She blinked. Off balance. I continued. "And patience is not naivety. Patience is preparation." She opened her mouth to retort, but I held up a hand. "I am done arguing with you. Everything from this point forward goes through Mr. Latham." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You think you can win? Courts are messy. They take time. They wear people down. And I don't get worn down, Maggie." For the first time in decades, I allowed myself to meet her intensity without shrinking. "I do not get worn down by truth," I said. "Only by lies." Her face twisted. But then, just as she turned to leave, she said something revealing. "If you hadn't found that letter, none of this would be happening." That was her slip. Her confession. She knew exactly what letter I meant. And she knew she had hidden it. I memorized her words. And that evening, I wrote them down in a dated notebook. Documentation. Meanwhile, Mr. Latham updated me that the forensic analysis of the altered will draft indicated pressure marks consistent with tracing. The kind used to forge a signature. Everything was aligning. Steadily. Calmly. Irrefutably. But the true turning point came not from evidence, nor confrontation, nor anger. It came from clarity, the kind that arrives when grief and betrayal cease clouding your judgment. I realized that my fight was no longer just about a stolen letter or a forged document. It was about reclaiming the ground I had surrendered throughout my life by avoiding conflict. This time, I would not step aside. I would stand exactly where truth placed me. And I would let the consequences unfold, quietly, steadily, as naturally as dusk becoming night. But Lorraine, sensing control slipping, made one final attempt to regain power. She requested a mediation meeting. Not with lawyers. Not with the executor. In my home. At my table. She wanted to speak, woman to woman. I agreed. Because Mr. Latham would be present. And so would the evidence. And Lorraine, unaware that her every action was now documented, would bring the last piece of the puzzle herself. The mediation meeting took place on a grey Tuesday morning. Rain streaked the windows, the soft, steady kind that muffles sound and sharpens attention. Lorraine arrived precisely on time, dressed in dark colors that made her look smaller than usual. She carried a folder tucked under her arm, its edges frayed from handling. Mr. Latham greeted her courteously, though with professional distance. We sat around my dining table, the same place where the truth had first unraveled. Lorraine wasted no time. I want this resolved quietly, she said. No courts. No public records. Families should not fight this way. Her sudden appeal to unity struck me as absurdly ironic. But I let her speak. I'm willing, she continued, to acknowledge a misunderstanding. To say that perhaps I forgot to give you the insurance letter. Things were chaotic. I was grieving. Mr. Latham folded his hands neatly. Your signature on the certified letter receipt indicates otherwise. Lorraine inhaled sharply through her nose. He continued, and the altered will draft, marked do not use, shows signs of tracing. These are not accidental behaviors. She glared at him. You're taking her side. I'm taking the side of documented fact, he replied. Silence settled over the room. Then Lorraine opened the folder she'd brought and pulled out a stack of papers. I don't want money, she insisted. I just want acknowledgement that I helped Daniel. That I handled things because Maggie couldn't. I leaned forward slightly. You handled things, I said softly, by hiding his final wishes. She flinched. Then, unexpectedly, her facade cracked. Her eyes glistened with something. Anger, yes, but beneath it, something more fragile. I was alone, she whispered. I thought after Daniel died, maybe the family would need me again. Maybe I could be important. And when I saw that letter, I panicked. I thought you'd close ranks and leave me out. I thought. She stopped herself. Emotion. Real emotion. Not performance. But remorse is not a substitute for restitution. I understand your loneliness, I said gently. I have known loneliness too. But what you did was not born of grief. It was born of fear and entitlement. And both caused harm. Tears slipped down her cheek, but she wiped them away quickly, unwilling to appear vulnerable. Mr. Latham spoke next. Lorraine, the best path forward is cooperation. If you voluntarily sign a statement acknowledging you withheld documents, the court may view your involvement as interference rather than fraud. Her eyes widened. Fraud. That is what forging a signature draft constitutes, he said calmly. Lorraine's breath grew uneven. She looked around the room, the home where she had once walked with unearned authority. And for the first time, she seemed to realize she had no power here. Only truth did. Her downfall was not loud, not chaotic, not dramatic. It was silent. She signed the acknowledgement. She agreed to step aside from all estate matters. She forfeited any informal claims she had voiced to relatives. And with trembling fingers, she handed Mr. Latham the folder she'd brought, containing several of Daniel's mail items she had also withheld. The evidence was complete. When she left, she didn't slam the door. She closed it softly, almost tenderly, as though releasing something heavy she had carried too long. And I watched her walk down my steps, shoulders curved, shawl clutched tight against the drizzle. Her downfall had not required cruelty. It required truth. And truth had done its work. But the aftermath, my aftermath, was still waiting. In the weeks that followed, the estate progressed smoothly under Mr. Latham's guidance. The insurance claim processed without resistance. The court accepted Lorraine's written acknowledgement, and the altered will draft was archived as evidence of attempted interference, but no further charges were pursued, largely because I requested leniency. Not forgiveness. Not absolution. Just space. Space between consequence and compassion. My cousins reached out often, offering apologies mixed with uncertainty. They were adjusting to the new understanding of the woman who had shaped so much of their upbringing. Their grief was a different kind, mourning the loss of trust rather than the loss of a person. As for me, a calm settled into my days. Not triumph. Not vindication. Clarity. I spent long afternoons in my garden, pruning rose bushes Daniel once teased me about. "You always choose the fussy ones," he'd said. "Why not plant something that doesn't stab you?" But the truth is, I appreciated the honesty of thorns. They communicate boundaries without malice. One morning, while watching the sun rise over the hydrangeas, I realized something gently profound. I no longer felt overshadowed. For decades, I had lived in a family where speaking softly was mistaken for weakness. But my strength had never been volume. It had been endurance. Careful observation. The ability to remain steady when others spun stories around me. Lorraine had underestimated me because she believed calmness meant compliance. She learned differently. When the final disbursement arrived, I placed most of the funds into a trust for Daniel's grandchildren. They were young, bright, and unburdened by the family's historical entanglements. A portion I kept aside, quietly, for something Daniel always wanted me to do. Travel. "Go somewhere beautiful," he once told me. "Don't wait for the right time. Time doesn't care about our plans." I booked a trip to Nova Scotia, where the cliffs meet the ocean with language older than grief. Before leaving, I wrote a letter to Lorraine. Not accusing. Not scolding. Simply truthful. "We are shaped by what we choose when no one is watching. I hope, for your own peace, you choose differently from now on." I didn't know whether she would respond. I didn't need her to. One evening, packing my suitcase, I found myself holding the original insurance letter again. The one she hid. The one that initiated everything. Only now, it didn't feel heavy. It felt like a restored voice. Daniel's voice. A whisper carried forward by ink and intention. That night I slept deeply, deeper than I had in months, knowing the chapter was finally closing. But closure is not an ending. It is a doorway. And I stepped through it the moment my plane lifted into the sky. When people ask about revenge, they usually imagine something dramatic. Rage, confrontation, victory delivered with theatrical flourish. But real revenge, the kind rooted in justice rather than bitterness, looks entirely different. It is quiet. It is patient. It is simply the truth allowed to rise without interference. What happened with Lorraine taught me that families are not broken by conflict. They are broken by silence. By the things we choose not to say for the sake of peace, until peace becomes complicity. My revenge was not against a person. It was against a pattern, one that had governed our family for decades. And the redemption was not just mine. It was Daniel's. His wishes honored. His voice restored. His trust justified. When I walked along the cliffs of Nova Scotia, the wind cold against my cheeks, I realized something I wish I had known earlier in life. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors that do not open for dishonesty. And documentation, simple, steady truth preserved carefully, is the most powerful ally a gentle person can have. If you are listening to this story, perhaps you carry your own version of concealed letters, hidden truths, or family dynamics shaped by someone loud enough to rewrite reality. My advice is simple. Do not match their volume. Match their certainty. Match their endurance. Match their documentation. The truth does not need theatrics. It needs a witness willing to stand beside it without trembling. I once believed my quiet nature made me easy to overlook. Now I understand. Quiet is not the absence of power. Quiet is the mastery of it. And sometimes, the strongest revenge is simply refusing to let someone else define what is true. Thank you for listening. If you want to hear another story of justice reclaimed and dignity restored, I'm here. After all, truth has many voices. I am only one of them.